This was close to 20 years ago, so details will be sparse. I was playing 3.0 as part of a college gaming group who gathered weekly. I don't remember all the classes, but there was a centaur fighter and a human ranger. I was the paladin in this group. The incident in question started when we were battling some kind of evil wraith-like entity, don't remember what it actually was, who was the servant of the BBEG for the campaign. During the fight, the centaur was able to use his spear to pin the baddie to the wall. Then my turn came up, and since it was pinned and helpless, I dared to do the unthinkable. I performed a coup de grace. Needless to say, the fight was over right there. Everyone in the party got mad at me for doing such a dishonorable move. Paladins are supposed to be all about the fair fight and would never do such a thing. They even tried to convince the DM to remove my status as a paladin for it. Fortunately, the DM shut that down by saying I was justified since the enemy we were fighting was evil. The campaign broke up a few weeks later for reasons, and I don't think we even saw the BBEG. Man, look, I'm all for moral complexity and trying to understand the point of view of your enemies, but what are you gonna do? Give the evil, life-sucking wraith a hug? Because it's probably going to use that hug to kill you. On top of that, we see so many lawful, stupid paladin horror stories. Never thought I'd see a party trying to encourage that behavior. After reading these things for so long, you'd think I would have seen everything. We had one session, and he sent this message. I delayed session 1 by a week and a half due to technical issues with the VTT I was using, and also internet issues. When we finally got together for a game and had finished session 1, I woke up to a bunch of messages. The guy messaged me for like 3 hours straight in the middle of the night and accused me of ignoring him and not taking him seriously. This was the final message at 2 a.m. after he sent a bunch of hateful messages. I was asleep, not ignoring him. This was my first time DMing, which everyone, including him, was aware of. I almost quit there and then.
What the hell? Are you serious? I'm trying to give you one last chance to get some help on your campaign and have a conversation, and you are resigned to being whatever this is. Apathetic? Arrogant? Whatever. I don't care. Here's some feedback you need to hear but aren't asking for. You suck at communicating with your players, as evidenced here and in the server. You didn't care what anyone's characters were, and you didn't take the time to collaborate around those characters. Why bother making them special or interesting or having motivations if they don't matter to your story? Speaking of, why couldn't you prompt any of us that we should give our character a reason to want to join the Citadel? In fact, you went so far as to hand wave away our motivation as for whatever reason instead. That could have informed the character decision process. That could have been fun to build a story around. Imagine the story being that much richer if characters were forced to deal with the ramifications of the Citadel's betrayal. We couldn't do that though, because it's not a story we had any knowledge of before the first session. Collaborative stories are what D&D is about, after all. We didn't come to hear you tell us a story, we came to participate in one with choices and relevant histories. Not that you care. Which leads me to apathy. You come across as lazy and disinterested. You didn't even do prep. You didn't even name your city, for crying out loud. And you spent all your time doing something to make our VTT work for like 2 weeks. No one but you cared about using Foundry. We offered to use Avray or Roll20 or just Theater of the Mind. And truth is that any of us could have created that first encounter as an improv session. It all could have been done with Theater of the Mind, and it railroaded everyone to exactly one outcome with no decision for us to make. And now, I'm trying to patiently have a...
Patiently, right.
I'm trying to have a conversation with you about it, and you don't have the decency to discuss this like an adult. How arrogant. This campaign's most definitely not for me. I'd say good luck, except you already got super lucky with the group of players that you have here and are absolutely wasting their potential. What a disappointment. What a shame.
The things he mentioned were also untrue, such as the name of the city/world and such. He just was not paying attention. It was session 1, but more like session 0.5, just setting up the story and the world while in character, and everyone was aware of this. I had everyone's backstory and everything. During the session, he just yodeled the entire time. The typical main character type. took over way too much. He blocked everyone on the server and dipped before waiting for a reply. The four of us, we stuck together, and the group is still going strong nearly a year on. I found this guy from Reddit's LFG. It's tough to find decent players these days. Yeah, I really try to encourage LFG, and I think it can be great, but I do warn people that there is the possibility that it can be bad. It just takes one bad apple to really just sour your bunch, and here we have a really bad apple. I'm not gonna lie. This pissed me off a lot. I mean, there are a lot of stories that horrify me. I know we joke about it a lot, but this legitimately angers me because it represents something that I see so often. People who are way too spoiled with their GM and treat their game masters like trash. Now, of course, game masters are not immune to criticism. It's important to tell people what you're enjoying and not enjoying, but criticism is not an excuse to be a dick. People talk a lot about brutal honesty, but pretending that's the only kind of honesty is such a close-minded and silly point of view. You can be kind and honest at the same time. This guy has no mind for that. It's also important not to get a customer's always right mentality when it comes to criticizing your GM. I mean, that criticism of, you didn't entwine my backstory. Yeah, that would be valid if it wasn't the first session. I mean, what GM perfectly entwines everyone's backstories in the first game? Damn, I've watched every Critical Role campaign. Not even Matt Mercer does that. Come on. I think a lot of this BS was just derived from overzealous main character syndrome, which, yeah, we always love to see that. Opening note, this was 10 years ago at a now defunct game store. The game master was the man who owned the store. He had seen me run games at a local convention and asked if I'd be willing to join his game at his store. He had 3 other players in his group, including a good friend of mine. The setting was called Midnight and was an offshoot of the 3.5 edition D&D rules. I had an idea how to play the lovable, kinda dumb lunk of a fighter who was really good at fighting. Now, this guy used roll for stats rules, and I rolled fairly average, nothing above 16, nothing below 10. Most everything was around like 11s and 12s. Here is where the problem player playing a halfling wizard comes in. He saw my rolls and instantly started making fun of how useless my character was going to be. The GM brushed it off. I looked at my stats and asked if I could shift my 10 to an 8 and my 16 to an 18. I knew it was a stretch, but my argument was that would fit the dumb lunk concept better. The GM agreed. The halfling wizard lost it. He started calling me a min-maxer and power gamer who had no concept of the spirit of the game. Not disputing the min-maxing part, but again, more to just fit the character. My friend looked across the table and stated, "Didn't the GM let you do the same thing?"
Oh, that's different,
was the response. Things settled down and we started playing. This is when I noticed halfling wizards seem to have an infinite number of grease spells, as well as other spells. A familiar that could be anywhere, anytime he chooses, at level 4. The worst, though, was that he would roll, snatch the dice, and then call out the number. Constantly. And he always rolled high, even though you couldn't see what he was rolling. Okay, so I asked him how many times he could cast grease a day.
I don't have to tell you.
Then he started back on the min-max stuff again. Anytime he could slip a jab at me, he would. At this point, the other players were starting to notice. This is when he started going after whoever I was fighting and throwing grease under me and the enemy. 4 encounters, no rest. He was still slinging grease spells in my direction, causing me to slip, making barbed comments at me, and just being an ass. Finally, I pointed out again. How many times could he cast this damn spell? He openly called me a cheater, but I had managed to do so little to nothing during this game, and said it was an innate ability of his character. The DM was now aware, but as interesting of an idea as he had, he mostly just let it play. However, he too was now asking questions. It created a real explosion at the table. By this point, I had had enough. So, not having fun, I packed up my stuff and I left. I thanked the GM for the game and went home. A little over 2 hours later, my friend who was at the game called me to say he quit too. Apparently, after I left, the problem player started insulting me for being a poor sport, a cheater, and the reason no one likes playing. So hell, the other two put him on blast and questioned his entire character. The game stopped as he danced circles around hows and whys of what he was doing, but he had 3 stats at 18. The GM had mostly just let it slide, but when it came into question after I quit, he suddenly was paying attention. So the good thing was that my friend and I started our own game at his place, and we've run for nearly 2 years playing it. This is definitely a more subtle form of cheating, but combine the subtle cheating with being a dick to another player for basically no reason is, well, it's enough to put the nerves on, to say the least. A player asking a GM for a minor stat change is not the end of the world. Frankly, this player is asking. He's not demanding, he's not forcing, just asking. That is not a big deal by any means, especially since, in exchange for this increase in stats, this player is getting a decrease in other stats. I feel like that is fairly reasonable, especially since this cheating player did the exact same thing. I can't say why this guy got so upset over this, and frankly, it doesn't really matter. Bitterness just doesn't get you anywhere, especially in cases like this. When you're trying to play a game, you don't want to be angry. I think XP to level 3 made a great video about this. Being pissed off is just not a fun way to play most social activities. Yeah, a healthy degree of righteous fury at a BBEG maybe, but this kind of anger at a fellow player, especially over something like an increase in 2 to a stat, yeah, not worth it. So in late 2018, October or November, I discovered Dungeons & Dragons and instantly fell in love. At the beginning, I was a player in a local game store, but everyone was very unhappy with the GM, and so I set out to create my own campaign. After 5 months since I first discovered D&D, in April, I started a monumental homebrew project in the setting of a fantasy series I loved, and still love, that required a lot of adjustments, preparation, and extra work. We did a Session 0, a trial one-shot. Every character had an interesting backstory that tied to the main plot and in many subplots, and I did a one-on-one session with each player to let them have a feel for the characters and the world. It became a house game. It was hard. Preparing sessions took time, and I tried to make everything as engaging as possible. To give you a measure of the amount of work I did near the end to try and provide an experience as immersive and complex and alive as possible, for the last side quest the party chose to do, I had on my part a 26-page document full of notes, descriptions, dialogue, and information to give the players, plus dedicated sound effects and soundtracks. Sure, it took 3 sessions to complete the side quest, but I had it all prepared beforehand. And of course, each character was deeply interwoven into the story and had the chance to be at the center of the drama for the different character arcs. So I can say with confidence that I was good, and that my players loved it and often reminded me to keep up the good work and enthusiastically complimented the session or anticipated the next one. Sometimes I wanted to stop and they begged me to continue, or laughed or cried or whatever that word is. It was so much fun. They were invested in the story and the characters, the dynamics, the group grew. The game was fun and engaging for everyone. We never had problems scheduling, and we played from 16 p.m. to 1 a.m. every week. Sure, there were problems. We had to adjust rules sometimes. One of my players, the fiance of my most active and experienced player, never really cared for the game, but those were trivial problems. Even when a player had to stay away from our city for 3 or 4 months, we kept playing with him on call and everything worked out. Honestly, I felt I had overall the perfect table and was having a perfect D&D experience, but I was beginning to get real tired of being the only GM, so I found another game where I could be a player while I kept mastering my campaign. In this other game, I found another player that, in my opinion, would appreciate my campaign. He was passionate, smart, engaged, and proactive, but also demanding and prone to bursts of anger. I knew he could bring problems, but I was convinced he could be a new element that, if I channeled, could enrich the game more. So I found myself with 6 players, a bit much for my taste, but nothing I couldn't handle. He had a very strong character and a strong personality, and constantly asked for more attention, power, information, and relevance to the game. But I didn't give in and managed to go on. And the game, in fact, got better. Even the rivalries that formed gave life to more interesting dynamics and allowed some of the best moments of the campaign. This new player, that I will call Wolf from now on, is the reason I'm telling this story, though. At one point, unfortunately, 2 of my players became too busy with life to keep playing, and so I remained with 4 players, but the campaign continued as strong and lively as ever and became even more focused. Wolf was a very good player in the mechanical sense of the term. His roleplay was on point, he knew his character like the back of his hand, actively tried to form bonds with the NPCs and other PCs, researched the lore of the world, etc. Sometimes he was still hot-headed and had animated discussions with me or the other players, but it was still fine. The good exceeded the bad. Then came the pandemic. We kept playing on Discord for a time. Finally, in July of 2021, I had a falling out with 2 of my players for reasons unrelated to the game, and I felt like the 2 remaining people, Wolf was one of them, just weren't enough to keep me going. The story had progressed too far, become too personal, and too entwined with those characters. The relationships with the various NPCs were too important, and honestly, I was just generally feeling down. It had been a beautiful and fun experience, but it was over. Or so I thought. Wolf remained close to me in the months that followed, and we became friends, or so I thought. In the end, his passion was what convinced me to resume the original campaign from where we had left off, instead of starting a new one. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, that things would never be the same, and that it would take time for the new players to adapt, grow to care about the world and about the story at this point 2 years in the making, and that there would be an imbalance of power, relevance, and knowledge between the original players and the brand new ones. I said as much to Wolf, but I hoped everything would work out. So after searching for players in May of 2022, the campaign resumed with 3 new players and newbies of the hobby, for a total of 5 players. All in all, I was excited to try again, and I was full of ideas. But since then, I only heard complaints from Wolf about literally anything. After every session, he would message me with something negative to say. It grated on me, eroding my patience, but I held on, hoping that things would get better. Some of the complaints were constructive, and I took them into account, altering a few rules to smooth the game over. Some were frankly abused, and, well, I ignored that. I really didn't know how serious the problem was, because from my POV, the other players were gradually beginning to share the same interests as the old ones. Things kept getting better with time. But Wolf complained that his experience wasn't as fun as before, that I was being too generous with the new players, giving them too much attention and information, and he would often make his displeasure known with snarky remarks during the game, but we took it in stride with a laugh. Finally, yesterday, Wolf said to me that he wasn't going to continue playing, or that he would act in-game without care for the other players, or as a murder hobo if I did not consent to his requests for more attention, power, and influence in the decision-making of the campaign. An ultimatum of sorts. Only at that point I realized this could not be allowed to go on. I asked him to please write me a message to tell me if he was sure he wanted to leave and to specify what his problems were for the campaign. I will list some of the grievances and accusations, quoting from his messages. Since I have been playing in this campaign longer, I should permanently be more powerful than the others, and they should never be able to catch up to me. The new players should be grateful that my character is so much stronger than theirs, because I can save them during fights. My character should be more powerful, or able to do this or that, because it makes sense. The new players know nothing about the lore, and still are able to talk with mysterious entities that nullifies the adversaries we had to overcome the past to do the same. The new players do not deserve to know anything about the world and the lore. The new player's character is a mage that studied books all his life. Therefore, he shouldn't add his proficiency bonus to rolls to hit. Your story became one for children. You changed the story. You're responsible for all this. You mismanaged the information. Let the new players have meaningful content while it should have been simple and kept giving. Things I had to work for a long time to obtain, like information or upgrades, are now given for free. The others don't know how to play, and there have been relevant plot points and information ruined by everything. I have no intention to roleplay with people that aren't remotely worthy to even know a sliver of lore. I wasted time and energy on swines while you were lenient with them. You preferred giving things to them and destroyed the game. Well, after reading that, and much more, I apologized to the other players and abruptly closed the campaign. Yes, I realize now that the correct thing to do would have been to kick Wolf out and keep the campaign running for the others, but frankly, all the wind had just gone out of my sails at that point. The other players didn't deserve to have their fun ruined. Not by Wolf, and not by me, for ending it, and it was unfair and cowardly of me to not address the situation before. Anyway, the story goes on. After 3 days of complete silence on his part, he writes me again, beginning with saying that he was writing me only because his girlfriend had advised him to. He then asks me to continue the campaign with him, and said that he was pissed for having to be the only one to propose it because he expected that I would try to convince him to come back. Yeah, if you think it's weird, you're not alone. I was confused too. Obviously, I refused to continue the campaign, but I tried to be as diplomatic, calm, and reasonable as possible, but it quickly devolved on his part in a deluge of insults at my expense, quite childish and personal ones at that, and an explicit break of our supposed friendship that evidently to him was only conditional to his participation in the game. And this is it. TLDR, player convinced me to resume an ongoing campaign that he really liked and that had been on hiatus, but then complained about everything for months after it was started, and kept asking I give him more attention, information, and power, and less to the new players. Eventually, he gave me an ultimatum and then left when I refused to cave in. After 3 days, he asked to resume playing and insulted me and severed all ties when I refused. again. Man, this level of entitlement is irritating and very, very real. I've actually experienced this exact same thing. This level of entitlement from problem players who ruin campaigns and they expect you to bow down to them when they ask you to restart it, even gaslighting you into thinking that it was your fault the whole time. We have a theme quickly popping up in this video of player to DM critique, and again, like I've said many times, you can criticize your DM, but there are ways to do it tastefully and ways to do it badly. This is badly. Now, on top of that, the thing he's critiquing, I think that I can see somewhat his perspective. Somewhat, I exaggerate. I like it when things are difficult. If you've seen my games, you know that I love me a difficult combat, edge of your seat type stuff. Love that. However, that's not everyone's style. This DM changed his style, or seemingly changed his style, made things a little bit more user-friendly for the brand new players, which is a good move, by the way. Great move to make the game more accessible for people who had never played before. However, this guy not only got mad about the accessibility, but also mad that he wasn't the main character. I think he had this expectation that he'd be the experienced veteran warrior, guiding these newbies through the adventure when he wasn't. He was just another warrior alongside them, which really pissed him off. Not only is gatekeeping the lore of your D&D game extremely cringy, but main character syndrome, as I said many times, it ruins games. From bad critique to just being a problem player, it's safe to say that this guy sucks. So I was in a D&D group, 3 of whom I had played D&D with for around a decade or so. 2 of the other players started with them when I did a couple years ago during COVID, and we had a new player about midway through. Historically, the veteran players all took turns being the DM because they had the most experience, so when one of the most recent homebrew campaigns came to an end, I decided to try my hand at being the DM to let them play together and develop my skills. What a mistake that was. Here are some of the things these veteran players have done or said. They have mocked my world every session, calling it a ripoff of multiple games, series, films. I get some inspiration from various sources of media, as they did, but when it was their homebrew worlds taking inspiration, they were praised for their copying, but when it was mine, I was mocked and jeered at. I'm not entirely sure why. Either way, I made steps to change it, but I was called out for that too. They even started to compare it to another universe or series I know nothing about. When I said that they claimed I must have stolen it somehow, I gave up on that battle. They metagame almost exclusively. They would treat it less like D&D and more like a puzzle to try and guess what I, the DM, have written/made for them. If they can't get the answer through metagaming, they ask if their characters can just know it suddenly so I can tell them and they can move on. It's pretty draining. Next was their endless coaching of sessions with me. Every session, I get a breakdown of what I've done wrong or what I should improve on. They asked me multiple times to pull up a Word doc and write down what they're saying and include it in the next session and change the story made for them. Next is the in-jokes. 2 of the players would often get together and make some really mean jokes about certain things in the session, either how I said something or how the story was just generally going. Other players told me this, and they eventually admitted to it. If some element of the story doesn't make sense right away, or they just missed the point, I messed up, or it was by design. They laugh about it and mock it, and when the appropriate reveal comes to light, they feel it's because they made it happen by playfully pointing out my mistake. Here was the final straw. They kept telling other less experienced players what to do during roleplay and combat to take away their agency. Here's a great example of that. Alright, combat starts. We're rolling initiative. Yennefer the Wizard, you're up first. You're up first? What the Yennefer the Wizard, you're up first. 3 orcs hidden from sight suddenly emerge and surround you. You're newer to D&D, so take your time. Okay, so I'm gonna use Misty Step to... No, you should disengage and run away. You need to save your spell slots for the obvious BBEG we think the DM has planned later on, so that's not optimal. Oh yeah, I agree. That, or you should, and that's how pretty much all combat goes. It's the veterans metagaming on how to best overcome the encounter while we all sit around and just wait for them to finish. The new player doesn't get to act in their turn. When I interrupt and ask them to not do this, you know, to allow other players to take their turns, I get shouted down and told it's good coaching for me to listen and improve, and they're just helping. 2 of the veterans also dropped out around 5 sessions in, calling the story boring and uninteresting. They then sat me down and talked to me for about under 2 hours about how I could improve on everything I'm doing and what they would do with my world lore if they were the DM. Somehow this conversation morphed and I was listening to them talk about their homebrew lore and how it's better than mine for most of this. This is the point I decided to I just ended it with that group. I probably should have done it earlier, but I gave them the benefit of the doubt. I've started since with a new group, with new players, and we're having a blast. They have said I'm a great DM, and I was just unlucky. Almost a year with this new group, and I'm glad I got out. Yeah, we've definitely got a theme in this episode. I wonder why all these stories are popping up around the same time. Maybe because burnout is just on the mind in the D&D community. But yeah, let's talk about criticism once more from another angle. This time, we've got a group talking about the DM's lore and, frankly, not really liking it. And giving constructive feedback is not a bad thing. But there becomes a point where it just gets kind of insipid, and depending on your presentation, could even be interpreted as pretentious or condescending. Look, different stories, different worlds, they're going to appeal to different people. I don't know what problems they saw with this guy's world. Maybe it really was that disjointed, but frankly, when you're creating a homebrew world, yeah, sometimes it might be a little bit disjointed. We're not all Tolkien or Martin, and while I think we should all strive to improve, that kind of improvement takes time, and frankly, not everyone's going to need to have a perfectly organized homebrew world. I mean, it's not something that's needed for every single group. Trying to immediately learn that skill under intense pressure because a bunch of guys are ganging up on you to force it, yeah, that is gonna cause immediate burnout. Throw metagaming and some condescending teaching on the pile, and, well, you got a group of players that I think you're better off without. And that's going to be it for today's episode of RPG Horror Stories. If you guys enjoyed, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then you can check out my Tavern Adjacent podcast where we talk all things TTRPGs while also talking about some of your horror stories. And while you're there in the cards, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment-friendly critique to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.